A big thank you to all of my listeners. And if you would like to support this transmission even more and boost your trading account, go to trendfollowing.com/now. And without any further delay, on to today's show. This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Emma Seppala. She is the Associate Director of the Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Her new book, The Happiness Track: How to Apply the Science of Happiness to Accelerate Your Success. Now, before you think for a second that this is just some self-help that you already understand, not so fast. There is a tremendous amount of science, neuroscience, behind Emma's work. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Emma Seppala. So Emma, I have to say, I love having you on because you just add to my list. I feel like a guy who is going down the path of collecting the hardest working, brightest people associated with psychology across the world. And I don't know if you've seen some of the folks that have appeared on my show. If not, I mean, a lot of them are mentioned in your book, but I love this path. It's kind of like a side gig for me. I'm not so sure how it happened, but I appreciate you for adding to the list.
Oh, well, I'm honored to be part of the list.
Your newest work, the Happiness Track. I mean, this is really what everyone's about. I mean, we say we've got to go do the work and we've got to do this and we got to do that, but really it comes down to happiness. And I thought a great place to start today would be with a little bit of a science explanation. And perhaps you can put your best professorial hat on and define to the audience, what is happiness scientifically? How would you describe it? And what is happening inside us when that moment happens that we're happy?
That's a great question. And in many ways, it's a very subjective experience. And it's also one that's very difficult to describe and that scientists have also grappled with in terms of definitions. In general, happiness is often divided into two broad categories. And one of them being hedonic happiness and the other eudaimonic. And hedonic happiness is all the pleasures of the senses, all the joys that we derive from food, sex, any kind of sensual pleasure, in addition to material pleasures like awards, money, different, new car. So all of the different things that might bring us those bursts of joy. Yet what we know about hedonic happiness is it doesn't last very long. It comes and goes very quickly, leaving us hungry for more, which was probably evolutionarily adaptive, because if we ate food and we were satisfied forever, we wouldn't keep eating and taking care of ourselves, or we wouldn't keep reproducing if we weren't looking for mates and so forth. At the level of the brain, hedonic joys, hedonic pleasures last for a very short period of time. However, eudaimonic happiness is that form of happiness. I would even call it fulfillment, because it goes beyond a simple joy that we derive from living a life of meaning, a life of connection, positive connection with other people, a life of service, of altruism, a life that is beyond oneself alone, that has a certain purpose to it. And eudaimonic happiness at the level of the body and mind leads to a joy that is much longer lasting, that doesn't just come and go. It's much more continuous. And even at the level of the body, we see that it's associated with much lower inflammation rates at the cellular level than, say, hedonic people whose life is predominantly characterized by hedonic happiness, who actually have very high inflammation levels.
So let me give this sarcastic retort. You're telling me that the folks out there that have these apps, these dating apps, where they swipe right or left all day long, I've never done one, I'm scared to death, or the selfies on Facebook, you're saying this type of happiness, and I think deep down everyone knows it, is just not the direction. Everyone's kind of there right now, but it's really the wrong there to be in the middle of.
Yes, and we're a little lost because the world is telling us that that's where we should derive our pleasure from. And they're also very addictive. Social media, getting notifications, for example, it gives you that little burst of joy. And that what we know about those little bursts of joy is that they trigger a desire for more. And that's why people find themselves addicted to their cell phone, for example. Their brain loves novelty. The brain gets a little burst of dopamine every time something new happens, something positive happens. So it can really hook you. And in fact, a lot of very, very smart marketing people are working to make apps much more addictive, for lack of a better word. We may have a feeling that that's not going to bring us the greatest joy, and yet we can get very easily hooked due to how the brain works.
Let me take you into the heart of the matter and let you dive deep. In your new work, The Happiness Track, you really break apart something that I think perhaps maybe we've thought about or we've once pondered, but I think the way you highlight it, the way you just outline it, and what I'm getting at is the myths of success. These are just, success being tied to stress and anxiety, perseverance at all cost, avoidance of personal weakness, this myopic focus on cultivating expertise in a specialized niche. And this is it. This has been the dogma of happiness. If you do all these things, apparently if you do all these things at the end of the road, when you're like 70 or 80 and they tell you can retire, you will now be happy if you've done all these things over the course of a lifetime.
Yes, intuitively, we know that's not true, but we are hooked into these false theories of success, this idea that you have to just keep plugging away without stopping. You can't take a break. If you look at Americans overall, they have less vacation days than any other country in the world, and yet most Americans do not take all of their vacation days. And of those that do, 91% are checking their email. There's this sense that you just can't stop. You can't afford to stop. But what happens is that we actually are seeing burnout levels as like we've never seen before. About 50% burnout across industries, whether you're working for a nonprofit or you're working in the healthcare system or the legal system. So, and we're also seeing that 70% of the American workforce is disengaged at work. This is a crisis that we're facing. What we're doing is not working, and we're buying into these false theories of success that are actually making us less productive. For example, if we are constantly running on adrenaline, which is what we're doing, over-caffeinating, over-scheduling ourselves, waiting till the last minute to get things done, and so forth and so on, we have this belief that adrenaline is the only way to get things done, and yet what that leads to is burnout quicker. Chronic stress, there's nothing wrong with short-term stress. It definitely can help you get through a deadline, but chronic stress, which is what we're embracing, actually starts to deplete our attention, our memory, our immune function, our health. It raises inflammation in the body. And we've heard about the detriments of chronic stress, but we're still embracing a very high stress life. Now, you might argue, well, I can't help it. There's nothing I can do about it, but there is. What I'm saying is that you don't have to change. You can't always change the demands coming your way. You can't always change the stresses in the life, personal and professional life stresses coming your way. But one thing you can do is take care of the state of your own mind. Because if your mind is in a good place, you can handle everything much better and much more resiliently.
I want to break apart a lot of your work in depth in this conversation, but I would love at the beginning here to talk about, I've seen you refer to this as a soft subject. I think for any of us, though, that have paid attention, it's not really soft, but I get your point. And you talk about a story of presenting to a group of CPAs. Now, you have a very pleasant voice. So I can, if I see you already saying that some people perceive this as soft, you have a pleasant voice. I can imagine you in a room of male CPAs, some of the driest people on the planet. I say that with all due respect to my very dry CPAs. It's 1998. How do you break through? How do you break through this, quote, soft subject?
Really? It's just data. What I did, for example, in that meeting at this accounting firm was, when I first walked in, there were snickers around the room. People were obviously forced to be there, and they were thinking, what am I wasting my morning sitting in on this Science of Happiness workshop or lecture or whatever. The first couple slides were nothing but data. Data showing the cost of stress to organizations, data showing what happens when an organization has a positive work environment and is happier. There's greater productivity, less turnover, increased performance, greater loyalty. People are more emotionally intelligent. There's better decision making overall, and people go out of their way to go above and beyond their call, their call of duty to perform. And so what we're seeing is that when you show the data, you really don't need to say much more than that. And that's why I wrote the happiness track. It's not just another soft happiness book. It's, here's the data. Now think about how you want to live your life. And the good news is that despite us having this misconception that in order to be successful, we have to sacrifice or postpone our happiness, it's not true. That's good news. The good news is that if we take care of ourselves, those around us, and are happier, have a more fulfilling life, we're actually going to be far more successful than we ever knew was possible.
Okay, I'm a few years out of college. I don't know if things have changed. I seriously doubt they have. I'm guessing that the typical routine on college campuses, unbeknownst to parents and perhaps even faculty, is massive amounts of Adderall, staying up all night for rote memorization. Because when you have the high grade, you will ultimately be successful, and then you will ultimately be happy. So talk about the idea of success and happiness when, as far as I know, unless something's drastically changed in the last 15 years, college campuses are the antithesis of your work in the happiness track. Or am I off the deep end?
I would say especially very high-achieving college campuses. I personally went to Yale and did my graduate studies at Stanford, and I definitely saw that the students themselves are already buying into these myths, and they're not happy. It was very interesting because I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for my postdoc. Here were the smartest students in their state at this university, and yet there was a much greater balance. There is something that happens when you go into an overachiever campus, where there is people are really buying into these myths, and they're also self-destructing at the same time, unbeknownst to them, and they're not happy.
You talk about the Stanford Duck Syndrome.
Yep, Stanford Duck Syndrome, especially if you've been to Stanford. It's probably the most beautiful campus in the world.
It's awesome. It's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. The sun is shining. People are running around in flip-flops, drinking juices, and just enjoying the sun. And yet, so they look so relaxed on the outside, like a duck floating on water, but underneath they're pedaling furiously. I mean, the Stanford students I know were running for Congress, were Olympic athletes, were writing a book, were starting a nonprofit, were one of Forbes 20 under 20. I mean, which is great, and it's an outward measure of success, but I also taught these students the psychology of happiness. I saw firsthand what was going on inside of them, and there's so much despair and distress and this idea that the only way to be successful is to burn myself into the ground.
As we talk about like the major universities, the super achieving universities, and you've had this word track in your title. And I think one of the things that's hard for people, I look at myself, I'm just kind of a guy that did not follow the track. And I think how does one get off it? Because if you spend your life as a small child and, you do well and you get the grades, I mean, but by the time you get to Stanford, this has been, from age 6 to 17 or 18, this has been a long time of being rewarded by the system, by the parents. And, even though the parents all say, hey, be happy, but they won't be happy if you get bad grades.
That's right. So what I'm demonstrating in the happiness track is that if you look at the data, if we do the things that we need to do to reduce stress, and I give a lot of, I think that are good suggestions because I've done research with some of the most stressed individuals in our society, veterans with trauma, and I've seen how they can cultivate resilience. And if we can do the same thing, if we take time off of work, and when we can, instead of always being plugged in, if we do things, if we look out for others rather than just ourselves, those are just a few examples that I mentioned, but by doing that, not only will we be much happier and healthier, but we'll actually be more productive, we'll be more focused, we'll be more creative and innovative, we'll be more charismatic, and we'll have better relationships with other people, which in turn further enhances our success and well-being. And this is, again, all data-driven, and yet somehow we've bought into these theories that are actually very self-destructive, but if we listen to the data, the best way for us to reach our maximum potential is actually to take care of ourselves.
Let me let you tell a story. You tell it in your book, and you talk about, I believe it was Lloyd's, but I'm not sure. There was a bank in London, a new CEO or a new top dog was hired, and he came into the situation. Talk about what happened next. Describe his coming into the bank, the stress that he took on, and the end result.
Well, this particular CEO, when he came in, he worked very, very hard. There was a lot of promise and there was a lot of belief that he was going to turn things around. He actually went a whole week without sleeping. He had to take months off work because he had completely burned himself out. It's an extreme example, but one that, we often will do that in our lives. We'll often forget to listen to what our body needs. We'll forget to listen to what everything is telling us because we believe we have to sacrifice ourselves in order to get things done. And yet that is such a false conception. It's really too bad. And yet, again, we can't do anything about the demands that are thrown our way. We have to meet up, whether it's, parenting demands or it's professional demands. Every day we have things that we absolutely have to do, and we don't necessarily have a lot of time off. But some of the ways we can cultivate resilience are, and again, this is based on some of the research I did with veterans returning from war with trauma. We actually taught them how to tap into the opposite of their fight or flight, so the opposite of the stress response. We had them tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest, with a very simple and yet extremely effective technique, which is through breathing. We breathe all the time. We've been breathing since we're born, and yet research shows that our emotions are linked to our breath. So when we feel more stressed or more angry, for example, our breath is short and shallow. When we're more relaxed, our breath is deep and slow, and so forth and so on. Other examples are laughing or sobbing. Our breath changes with our emotions. What we don't know is that the opposite is also true. By changing our breath, we can change how we feel. With the veterans, we actually did a 1-week workshop with them in which they learned how to how to breathe in a certain way, and that actually alleviated their stress and trauma so deeply that after 1 week, their trauma scores had normalized. And these are veterans who've had trauma for many years. And 1 year later, they still had normal anxiety. Their anxiety had dropped to normal levels. This breathing, we did a particular breathing technique that's offered through a nonprofit for veterans called Project Welcome Home Troops, and for community members, in case anyone's interested in learning it, it's offered through Art of Living, which is a nonprofit as well. What we can do also on a daily basis in a very short period of time is learn how to to boost our resilience through breathing. When you inhale, your heart rate increases, and when you exhale, it decreases. So even just lengthening your exhales starts to tap into that parasympathetic nervous system, that calming response. I'll just tell you one funny story is that I describe a few breathing practices that you can do in the book. My agent, who has, no real reason to really engage, he helped bring my book to a publisher, but there was no real reason for him to delve deep into my book. He called me the other day and he's like, and he's a busy New Yorker type, and he was like, I got to tell you, I've been doing that breathing you talk about in the book. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He's like, I just feel so much calmer now during the day. So that's just a small, very practical example. And I try to give very practical science-based examples throughout the book, throughout the happiness track.
Well, I'll add something to that. I'm in my 4th year of doing yoga. As a guy in his mid to late 40s who can do the full splits, I think I'm right there.
Wow.
But I would, that's just BS bragging. But the breathing part is so true, and it's amazing to me. In the last 4 years, and this is something that I can't do without. The numbers of people that I've been able to convert or at least get to try is very limited. And yoga is such a great way to get started with an understanding of breathing. And it's a great workout as well.
Absolutely. And again, one of the things I address in the happiness track is energy management. We often think of time management and the fact that we have to, get this scheduling app or a better to-do list of some sort. Yet there's not much we can do about time at the end of the day. No matter how efficient you are, there's a lot you can do about energy management, and we've forgotten about that. So one of the things about energy management is just as I said, we embrace this high intensity mode when it comes to negative emotions like stress and anxiety. We do the same for positive emotions. Americans, when you ask them to define happiness, they'll use words like excitement and thrill. Whereas when you ask people in East Asia, Korea, Japan, China, to define happiness, they'll say words like peacefulness, serenity, contentment. So you see, in the United States, we value high intensity, whether it's stress and adrenaline or it's excitement and thrill. Again, nothing wrong with that, but over the long term, the body registers that as a fight or flight response, whether it's positive or negative. We need to look at how are we managing our energy. Do we always need to be in high intensity mode? Research shows, for example, if you divide your day between high intensity and low intensity activities, for example, you start with a high intensity activity, like you got to write a report or do something like that. And then next you do a low intensity activity like clearing out your desk or going through mail or something that doesn't engage your brain quite as intensely. And then you keep going, like then you do high intensity, low intensity. That's one really great way to not only manage your energy, but also boost the innovative part of your mind, your creativity, your inventiveness, which we all need in whatever we're doing. So that's one example. But the other is, you're talking about yoga and we're talking about breathing, is to nurture more calmness into our life. And again, given the fact that we equate happiness with excitement, calmness is not a very sexy term. Like we never say things like, I'm so calm to see you next week. It's always excited to see you next week. But if we nurture more calm, we do get to manage our energy much, much more. There's, for example, no reason that at the end of the day we are so exhausted despite all we've done all day is sit on a chair at our desk, right?
Not me. I'm not sitting in a chair all day long. Listen, I'm approaching this is the start of my 4th year spending the bulk of my time in Asia. And so let's jump right really in. You were talking about the comparison, and that serenity it's not necessarily just a choice where you say, okay, the Americans, I'm American, but we like this kind of like high intensity kind of excitement. That's our reward. That's what we want. And you talk about the comparison to Asia. This is one of the reasons that I think sometimes when I field the question from people in the West, especially America, well, why do you like Asia so much? And most of these people have never been. But I think it really comes down to this issue of serenity, which, look, I'm not touting any one particular religion, but of course, Buddhism opens up this Pandora's box. And one of the main thrusts in your book, which I want you to talk about right now, which is to stop chasing the future. I mean, the moment of right now is so much of Buddhism. The moment of right now. Talk about the moment of now, because there's a good portion of the secret, if there is a secret to finding happiness, is that moment of right now. And I do think that Asia has a head start in that. I'm not trying to say they're perfect or anything. I just think they got a head start in this moment of now.
Interesting. Well, we know that our brain wanders 50% of the time. So 50% of the time, we're not thinking about what we're doing. This is based on a study out of Harvard that gave people blackberries and pinged them throughout the day, asking them, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how are you feeling? And they found that 50% of the time, people are not thinking about what they're doing. So what about the feeling part? Well, the findings were that we are never happier than when we're in the present moment, even if we're doing something we don't like to be doing. But as long as your mind is with what you're doing, you're happier. So that's really fascinating.
The science shows that. I mean, whether it's brain scans or whatnot, the science shows that to be true.
The science shows that to be true. And yet we're doing 50% of the time our mind is wandering. The other thing is that, even when our mind's not wandering, we interrupt ourselves by picking up our technology to interrupt whatever it is that we happen to be doing in that moment, pulling ourselves in this and that direction. And then thanks to technology and email and texts and notifications, everything that's coming in all the time, we're bombarded with more information than we've ever had to grapple with. So it's harder and harder to be in the present moment. And yet, research again shows that, it's when we're present and when we can be focused that we're so much more productive, that we get so much more done in so much less time, and we're able to think much more clearly through our problems without those constant interruptions. And then finally, in terms of our relationships with other people, it boosts our charisma to be in the present moment. People think charisma is this gift, this special je ne sais quoi that just kind of alights on you at birth and that you just happen to have, as opposed to other people. But that's not true. If you look at the definitions of charisma is the ability to be fully present with another person. People who've met highly charismatic individuals like Bill Clinton, per se, or for example, they'll say, oh, he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Well, how did he do that? Well, he was completely attentive, completely focused on the other person, completely listening, completely empathic, completely enthusiastic. So that ability to be so present. And these days we can go days and days without being with someone who's so fully present with you. We ourselves have a hard time being present. Our mind is going 100 miles an hour while we're looking at someone and trying to have a conversation with them. So again, this is something we all grapple with, but if we're able to bring our mind more into the present moment, and breathing is huge for that, so is meditation, so is yoga, so is nurturing more calmness in your life by doing activities like being in nature, for example, which very much decreases anxiety. If you think of what anxiety and stress are, they're just a mind that's caught up in the future. It's caught up in what might happen, or it's triggered by the past, something that happened and you're afraid it will happen again. Same thing with anger, negative emotions. They're all about the past. If you're angry, it's about something that happened before, the moment before, or the day before, or the week before, or the year before, and yet people can still be stuck in that emotion.
I love your discussions about charisma and the one phrase that I jotted down, the absolute presence. And I'm thinking back to a presentation that I gave in Beijing last year in front of like 1,000 people, 1,000 Chinese. Not doing this on purpose or any kind of engineered way, but the moment you can just forget and just give everybody there what you really feel, give them what's really going on inside you, there's this, you can just see the connection. I'm not trying to say that I know whether I'm charismatic or not, but I can see when you can give, even if it's a very wide audience, when you give yourself in that moment to the other people, then there's a kind of a reversal right back at you. And then the whole room just gets electric. I love that feeling.
You're absolutely right. And especially, and I think this is a great tip for people who have a hard time with public speaking too, is whenever we're anxious, we become self-focused. And that's just something that we know from research. Negative emotions make us focused on ourselves. Anxiety makes us focused on ourselves. And yet, if in whatever moment we're in, we focus on others and we focus on what can I do to benefit the people around me? What can I do to be a gift to the people around me? The focus shifts completely, and so does your anxiety. The other thing is that you're talking about, and that I can hear in your voice, and even though we've not met before, I can feel this about your personality, is that you're an extremely authentic person. You are yourself, and you're not, and that is hugely important in connecting with other people. That authenticity, that ability to be oneself, whether sometimes that means that we're goofy or sometimes it means that we look insecure or whatever, is actually a fantastic way to connect with people, because by being yourself, you give others permission to be themselves. They relax, because our research shows that we read other people. There's no way we can pull one over on other people. Maybe con artists can do it for a little while, but really we are so wired to read other people's physiology. For example, if someone's angry and they're hiding it, then the person they're talking to's heart rate increases, because even if you're trying to hide it on the surface, we are intuitively linked to one another through our empathic response. And that's something that's just we're hardwired for. It's not woo-woo. We know that. That's why you smile when you see someone else smile. That's why you can have tears in your eyes when you see someone else cheering up. We are empathically wired with one another. And so again, if you're being authentic, if you're being vulnerable, if you're being yourself, and I can hear that you are a very authentic person just from the way our conversation, is that you really connect with other people too. So that is definitely a point of charisma.
It's funny about authentic, though, and I appreciate the nice words you say, but I think authentic sometimes, I guess when I think about it, it can be, some people, maybe it's just perfectly natural. I think in my case, it's a lot of battle scars, and then you cease to really care about what too many people that you don't even know think about you, and then you just kind of retreat back to well, you know what? I'm just me. I'm just going to be me, and I'm happy with that. Let's go. Exactly.
But it's very relaxing actually for you to be yourself.
Sure. It's great.
But by being yourself, you're actually giving a gift to others, because so many people are very concerned that who they are is not good enough. And I cover some of that in the book too, is that we tend to be very self-critical, and we believe self-criticism leads to self-improvement, and yet we couldn't be more wrong. Self-criticism is basically self-sabotage. We're bringing ourselves down. We're increasing our negative emotions. We're becoming less likely to grow and learn from our mistakes and challenges. And a much better approach is self-compassion, which sounds soft, but again, there's a lot of hard data to back it up. Self-compassion is the ability to treat yourself as you would a friend, with understanding and kindness. And that actually ends up making you more resilient in the face of failure, more likely to grow and learn from your mistakes, and more likely to actually self-improve.
Since we've been talking about the tracks that people are on at various universities, whether that's Stanford or Yale, and some of these tracks are not the best direction. But I think what's really cool about your work too is to get people thinking about not working, to get people thinking about how does one find creativity? How does one find the flow state? And you have this great example, and I would love for you to talk about it because I know you respect him a lot. And he's actually somebody, and many people in my audience will recognize, which is Myron Scholes, who shared the Nobel Prize for the option pricing model, I believe. But why don't you talk about Myron Scholes and his thoughts about not working and creativity?
Absolutely. So Myron is personal friend and mentor of mine, and I've always noticed about him that he has this incredibly childlike, not childish, but childlike spirit of enthusiasm, curiosity, and interest. He reads widely outside his field, is always in a good mood, no matter what difficulties he's going through personally, always is interested and kind and caring and supportive. He's also one of the greatest, most creative minds of our time. It's fascinating to speak to him. There's so many insights that are unveiled. If you look at what he does to foster that creative spirit, he does breathing practice and meditation every day. He takes solitary walks in nature every day. He plays golf. He reads, like I said, widely outside his field, which again, when you look at the research, CEOs across industries and across countries, when asked, what is the number one thing you value in incoming employees, they'll say creativity. Of course. That spirit of innovation, of disruption is absolutely required at this time and age. And yet, people don't know how to access that creativity. And when you look at the research, creativity is fostered when you do more of nothing, when you're idle rather than always occupied. And then again, in this time and age, we can get up and look at our phone, spend the whole day busy with our phones or technology, this, that, the other. And at night, look at the phone until the very last minute. In the past, we used to wait for the bus and just wait for the bus. Or just stand at the grocery line and just stand at the grocery line and space out and daydream and let our minds wander, which are all things that foster creativity. And yet these days we're so hyper-focused that we never access that state. And we know that creativity is born out of a state when the brain is in delta mode, which is when it's very relaxed. It's that time right before sleep, or that proverbial reason why you have great ideas when you're in the shower. And other ways to foster creativity is that ability to actually read and take up interest outside of your field. Research shows that often it's people right outside of a field that end up actually finding breakthrough solutions to problems in a different field. So it's that ability to really instead of always focusing on your niche, only focusing on what you do, allowing yourself to have that broader perspective really helps. And finally, silence. Silence is another thing that I found was very common in Myron, and also Pico Iyer, who's a best-selling writer that I also interviewed, also a creative genius of our time. Also, they spend a lot of time in silence, meditation or retreats, and that's where they get their greatest innovative insights.
It just struck me as you were talking, I was thinking about music, the creativity that goes into music. And at one point or another, we've all sat back and just admired someone that creates music, at a piano, singing, whatnot, in a band. Can any of us imagine that the greatest composers, singers, rock guitarists, can any of us imagine that they showed up at 9 a.m. and went home at 5 p.m. and that was how they did it? I can't imagine not one of them did that.
Right. Exactly. And I really hope people pay attention to this data, because just by making some small changes in our own workday or in the workday of the people who work for us, we can actually really, really create that spirit of innovation and creativity and make a real difference that way.
One last thing I would love for you to talk about, which is just, I thought was really cool. I've heard this stated in other ways. Tell the audience about the Salvador Dali sleep with the key state. What type of state was he going to? Explain the story from the top, because I think it's a really great story.
Absolutely. Again, this is looking at the research on creativity, and Salvador Dali felt that he knew that he could access that creativity in that place when his brain was in delta mode, that place right before sleep. And so what he did was he would hold a key between his fingers and go to sleep in a chair, and there was a metal plaque on the floor, a metal sheet of some sort. So he would let himself go into that daydreamy space that's right before sleep, that I would say is also akin to meditation. As soon as he would actually fall asleep, the key would fall on the metal sheet and make a bang and wake him up. But in this way, he could access that space, that beautifully creative, innovative space, and willfully put himself into that state of mind and allow his brain to access that delta wave mode.
You're forcing the dialogue to change with this work. You're forcing people to rethink. I'm sure some will never listen, but I'm sure some will be awake to something new. And it's really cool stuff. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Where is the best place we can send everybody?
Amazon is really easy, and it sends internationally. If you're in the UK or the Commonwealth countries like India, Australia, so forth, Amazon.uk has it. Otherwise, the US Amazon site has it and will also send internationally. And there's also an audio version that you can download off of Amazon Audible and so forth in Google Play. There are a number of options, and if you don't find one that works for you, you can actually go on my website, and I've got even more options on there too.
Your website is?
EmmaSeppala.com, EmmaSeppala.com, and then you can just go under book.
Emma, thank you for coming on. I hope in the future, when the new stuff comes out, we can talk again.
That sounds great. It was lovely to talk to you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.